Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening from wherever you are. Welcome to Lighthouse Broadcasting, and I am Dr. Laura Thompson. I'm here with a very, very special guest this evening. Let's tell you who he is today on the broadcast. We have a former Arualcat Productions Advisory Board member, now founder and CEO of C3 in This Together. Please welcome Dr. Morais Cassell.
Oh, it's
Dr.
good to
Morais.
see you, my friend. What an honor it is to join you in this platform and this amazing work that you're doing to use media to bring awareness, to bring hope, to bring light, and just to connect us all across the globe. So thank you for this opportunity.
Well, first, I'd like to congratulate you on your success since you obtained your doctorate in counselor education. You're also a certified counselor and QPR instructor in suicide awareness.
Yeah, so I want to make sure I give proper credit to my credentials in terms of my PhD and my master's, actually through Liberty University
Mm-hmm.
in Virginia. So grateful for the scholars and the amazing clinicians and professors who helped to shape the work that I've been doing through Liberty. So again, got to give credit. Liberty University, Lynchburg, Virginia. As you mentioned, I am a licensed professional counselor
Yes.
here in the state of Georgia. I'm a behavioral health specialist and a QPR certified suicide awareness trainer.
We have the right university. We have everything correct. Fantastic. Okay. But I really, really want to talk to you about your doctoral research. It was a spiritual based intervention to reduce anxiety whilst increasing coping skills in urban adolescents. And so I have a couple of questions I want to ask you about that. And I'm just going to start with the first question. So please tell us what the focus of your study was.
Well, my study, as you mentioned, was relating to urban adolescents. The focus of the study was really to investigate how a spiritually based intervention, in this case, a prayer wheel, which we'll talk about, how that could be used in combination with what's called a triangulation approach, could be used to reduce subsyndromal anxiety and increasing coping skills in urban adolescents. So, long and short, finding an intervention that was not pharmacologically based. So often, when we talk about therapy and working with people, we often think most often with medication. Well, we wanted to find an approach that was non pharmacological, that was spiritually based, to see how that could impact the lives of urban adolescents. And that was a prayer wheel, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Okay, well, that's awesome. So, what motivated you in 2018 to study this topic, anxiety and coping mechanisms in urban adolescents?
Well, even before I, respond to that question, just kind of want to give a little bit of context.
Please.
You'll notice the title spoke about subsyndromal anxiety, and that's not often talked about in research because subsyndromal anxiety really deals with individuals who they may not meet criteria for diagnosis of generalized anxiety, but they have symptoms of anxiety that's impacting their daily functioning. So part of my passion, part of my work is to highlight this idea of you might not meet criteria. If you were to see me as a clinician or your primary care provider or a psychiatrist or some other clinician, so often people would not meet criteria for saying that they're anxious or they're depressed or the list goes on and on. Well, in this case, I found in working with urban adolescents that they can have symptoms of anxiety, but it just doesn't meet criteria. So I wanted to find an approach that would address that specific experience of adolescents, urban adolescents. And then I integrated it with what's called a triangulation approach. And that simply means it's taking a multi approach to addressing adolescents, urban adolescents. So in other words, we found when we, as we've worked with urban adolescents, that you need to include a whole lot of stuff. Let's just kind of make it simple, right? It can't just be mental health management. It can't just be healthcare management. It has to include mental health. It may need to include medical health. It may need to include community services. It may need to include spiritually based intervention. So it requires, and the research shows, when you're working with urban adolescents, you may need to use what's called a triangulation approach, where you're integrating mental health, medical health, you're integrating parents, you're integrating educators, you're integrating the community, you're integrating the church, and the list goes on and on. So I hope that gave some context to that. So as it relates to why do this study, what motivated me to do this study surrounding anxiety and coping skills in urban adolescents? Well, the truth is, on a personal level, I was labeled urban at risk. So as a young man, I was labeled urban at risk. As an immigrant, being an immigrant kid, right, being raised by a single parent mom, I was labeled urban at risk. So certainly I understand the journey of what it is to be urban, to be at risk, to have many risk factors, to be placed in academic settings that labeled you as at risk, and making sure that you didn't become a menace to society, so to speak. So this research is actually very personal to home. But I love telling this story because today I get to tell young people, you're not at risk, but you are at potential. And I want to say that again. I want people to know, I want particularly urban at-risk kids to know that you may be labeled at risk, but please know that you're not at risk. You are at potential. So on a personal level, that's why, I wanted to investigate, find ways of helping people like myself cope, manage, and navigate the challenges that we face. Also, from a research perspective, from a clinical perspective, when I did a critical analysis of the research, there were several gaps in the literature. Right, there was not a lot of studies done. Number one, on subsyndromal anxiety. There was also very limited research that was done at the time on urban adolescents. So I wanted to do what my dissertation chair said for me to do is, you are just a brick in a wall that's meeting a need, right? So
That's
think about
it.
that. Yeah. And he really explained it well. So often
Wow.
when we think about research, we think we have to recreate the wall. We've got to rebuild the wall. And there's some truth to that. But I mean, this guy is brilliant. He knows what he's talking about. He said, you're just a brick. You're filling a brick in the wall. And for me, as I looked at the research, as I did critical analysis of the research, critiqued the research, looked at the literature, not a lot was being said, number one, in subsyndromal anxiety. And then, of course, not a lot was being done or said concerning urban adolescents.
Okay, so that was extremely thorough. And so now I'm interested in this prayer wheel. So you've mentioned the prayer wheel a couple of times. What is the basis of John Thornton's prayer wheel program? Would you care to share that with us, please?
Absolutely. I love talking about the work of Dr. Thornton. He's actually a Canadian psychiatrist. And in doing my research for my dissertation, I stumbled, a great stumble, if you will. I stumbled on his prayer wheel that he developed. As I mentioned, he's a Canadian psychiatrist. And he was reporting, and he continues to report, that he would use this prayer wheel with his patients. And he would find that his patients would recover. So they were experiencing therapeutic benefits by using this prayer wheel. Now, let me say here that Dr. Thornton, to my knowledge, and I'll just use this word loosely, is not a religious man or a spiritual man. So
Mm.
someone might be thinking, well, he must be a Christian therapist or a Christian psychiatrist. Well, to my knowledge, and I did fly into Toronto,
Oh,
spent a day with him, gathering the
wow.
research. Great man, brilliant mind, sharp mind, leading psychiatrist in Canada. But again, to my knowledge, he did not ascribe Christianity or some kind of religion.
Wow.
But what he found, and he continues to find, is that this prayer wheel has therapeutic benefits. His patients, his clients, when they engage with with the prayer wheel as a self-help technique, people were recovering and they continue to recover. So I absolutely love what he's done. I love his approach to the prayer wheel. He says that anyone can use the prayer wheel, regardless of your background, your belief, your religion, your culture, your gender, right? He says this prayer wheel works.
Wow. I would love to see the prayer wheel. It sounds so interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I'll tell you another thing that really captured my attention with Dr. Thornton is what he said. And he says in his work, he says, I developed this prayer wheel to take the dogma out of religion and out of science. And what he explains is that his goal is to take the dogma out of, first of all, science that says you don't need prayer.
Wow.
And then he says, my goal is to take the dogma out of religion that says prayer has to be a specific way. Oh,
Right.
I know some people listening, of course, you and I, we're embedded in the faith culture. We're clear about our faith,
Yeah.
our Christian faith. So I know for some listening, they might say, well, there's only one way to pray. We pray the Christian way. And, we agree with that. But I love what he says, right? That prayer should not be relegated to just one way or one approach. So yeah, let's take a look at the prayer wheel. Did you have a copy? I may have sent that to you, and I also have a version of that as well. So you tell me kind of
Well, let's see your quick version and let's see
yeah,
what
so
you.
I've got it right here. I hope you all can see this. I mean, I am
So is that the actual model from John Thornton?
yes, this is actually the model that
Wow.
he will engage his patients and his clients with this. Of course, this is a larger version, but he has them in small booklets, and he'll take people through this wheel. And as you can see here, it has about 8 components, takes about 5 minutes each to go through with the prayer wheel, where you're addressing a specific area. Of course, you could see some of those right there where it talks about different things about confession. One area says, count your blessings. And I love that. Count your blessings. Now, remember, he says that anyone can engage with prayer. And he says that prayer works, right? So one area is count your blessings. Another area is forgive yourself and others. Another area talks about ask for your needs and for others. And I want to pause here to kind of give context to how it worked with the urban adolescents. Now, remember, as urban adolescents, they, were, there you go. There's another version of that, right? They were facing many risk factors, but I remember quite clearly when we got to where it says ask for needs of yourself and others, that 2 of the participants, one of them, his prayer was for his brother that was incarcerated.
Okay.
Right. So you see how that worked in real time, right? So more than just research and numbers, it worked as related to the urban adolescent. He was praying for his incarcerated brother that he would be safe. I remember another participant, a female, young female urban adolescent, her prayer was similar, that her father was incarcerated So she was praying for her incarcerated father. So again, when we talk about working with urban adolescents, right, they're facing a, a variety of issues, right? They're facing immigration issues. They're facing incarcerated parents. They're facing being exposed to trauma and adverse childhood experiences, and the list goes on and on. So I wanted to find a way, a spiritually based intervention to
Mm-hmm.
help them cope and manage those risk factors that they were dealing with.
Wow. Well, I love both views, and I just love seeing the model view in all of its colors. It just seems it's extremely powerful, and the fact that John Thornton really he really wasn't dogmatic either way from the science or the religious
Right.
side.
Exactly.
It's pretty interesting. That kind of triangulates the study itself because he's not biased either way.
There you go.
Um, and in fact, it seems like in religious circles, when they say the prayer, it's like Our Father which art in heaven, how and
There you go.
it's that prayer, or it's Psalms 23, or the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And it's just, something dogmatic. Whereas when you did your study, which we're going to talk about that more in a second, you have participants who are just praying regular things that they need to have happen in their life, like, have my parent get out of jail. That's it's very practical, extremely
Very
practical.
practical.
Okay,
And
so yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, and I want to just speak to something else concerning the research, because of course we're talking about the study here.
Mm-hmm.
I actually replicated another study, which and you in your work, in your dissertation work, you're an advisor to many people. You understand how research works, that a lot of what we do, we replicate other studies.
Mm-hmm.
What that means is, again, you're not recreating necessarily. Some will do that, but what you're looking at is you're looking at when someone else did a previous study, and you now build on that with a different population. And I actually replicated a study that was done with this prayer wheel, which is how I discovered this. It was done out of the University of Pennsylvania, and it
Oh.
was done with elderly patients
Oh,
who,
wow.
who were dealing with subsyndromal anxiety. Again, anxiety that did not meet criteria for a diagnosis. And here's the amazing thing about what happened with this research.
What?
Was the University of Pennsylvania, they were looking for a non-pharmacological way of dealing with subsyndromal anxiety. So they suggested, now remember, this is the University of Pennsylvania, right?
Mm-hmm.
They suggested, let's look at prayer, right? So they recruited researchers, and one of the researchers was a lady by the name, doctor by the name of Dr. Rajakapal was her name.
Okay.
When they recruited her to do this study, she was extremely skeptical. And she said, there's no way that I want to do this study, because there's no way that you can measure and research prayer. Now, listen to what happened, Dr. Laura, and this is going to this is going to just so energized you. Well, reluctantly, she joined this study. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, I had a chance to spend some time with Dr. Rajakapal, via the telephone, again, doing my research, gathering the research. And she shared her story. She said, I reluctantly joined this study. I was skeptical about researching prayer. But by the time this study was done, I enrolled in seminary, and today I am a priest. Yes.
What?
I love telling her story.
What is okay, this is separate. So what's between the time that she did enrolled in the study and the
Mm-hmm.
time that she became a priest, like what was the gap in time between that?
You know what? I'd have to go back to see what the
Okay,
time was.
okay.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what the time frame was. I would imagine, it would be a little while, because you know how research goes. It takes actually this particular research was 6 weeks, right? So I remember from her study it was 6 weeks. So I would imagine it was a little bit more than 6 weeks,
Wow.
right? So by the time the study was done, prayer that she was so skeptical about had so impacted her
Mm.
life that she enrolled in seminary, and she's now a priest.
Well,
So
this is definitely up my alley from the standpoint of immersion. And if we even think about like the walk, that Christ walk, they heard about him. I mean, there's no social media. They heard about him. Then they decided to come to town where he was. And then the next thing they decided, okay, well, we heard about him. We want to see him. And then they were touched by him. And they, they got into the environment. They were actually touched by him. So this is profound. Okay, but we're going to continue. I'm kind of nosy. I love looking at studies, and I decided to look at, well, not nosy, but I'm also curious and interested. So I looked at the participants' response to the question about how satisfied they were with their families. And on average, from what I saw, they were on the very low end of being satisfied. In fact, in a lot of cases, most of them are closer to neutral. And this was in 2018, before the pandemic. Okay. So to what degree do you feel the results reflect the condition of urban families, or is this just a typical perception from the participants at the age that they were at in the study?
Well, first of all, Dr. Laura, thank you for being such a critical mind, right? Because that's what research is, right? You're critiquing, you're critiquing the research, and again, I've learned so much from those brilliant minds at Liberty University. They said what makes a good researcher is that the researcher themselves is also skeptical of their own research. So think about that. And they hammered home this point so well that I live it out today. They said that's why we don't use the word prove.
Right.
That a good researcher does not use the word, because you're not proving anything, right? What you're doing is you're suggesting, you're indicating, right? Because again, my professor said, what's cutting edge today will be dull tomorrow, right? Which is why we continue with research. So at the end of the 6 weeks when we did this study, and I did a satisfaction rating as it relates to how satisfied they were with their families after the research was done, it was pretty low. They were not satisfied with their families. They didn't view their families through good lens, if you will. And it's indicative of who urban adolescents are. It's indicative of who young people are, right? Well, first of all, let's keep in mind when we're talking about urban families, right? They're facing, as I mentioned, a variety of risk factors: trauma, violence, poverty, poor health, poor academics, limited access to mental health, single parent homes. So think about how traumatic that's already been for them and how they view family life. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So the research does bear witness that urban families who are at risk, they don't feel satisfied, not always, but most often in their families, right? But here's the other thing. When we research and when we work with adolescents, period, it's just, again, it's indicative of who they are. Their emotions are fluid and not static, right? Their emotions, and we'll just say it here, their emotions are fickle, right? So how they feel today is not what they feel tomorrow, and that's okay, right? The goal was to help them cope. The goal wasn't, to, and I'll say this, I often say this in therapy, and I say this in the work that we do. Too often people think that the goal is to get rid of the dysfunction. So let's stop there for a moment, because somebody's saying, well, that's what you need to do. Well, sometimes the goal is not to get rid of the dysfunction, but the goal is to help the person manage and thrive in the dysfunction, because to take away the dysfunction could make them more dysfunctional. Make sense?
Absolutely.
So my goal going in was not with rose-colored glasses, thinking that after this research, I'm not going to solve the world's problem. My goal was, can I give them some tools that will now help them to cope? So the numbers did bear witness that this is indicative of who young people are, that how satisfied they are today is not how satisfied they'll be tomorrow. And their emotions are just fluid and not static. And the other thing is, from a neurobiology perspective, keep in mind that our brains are not fully developed till the age of 24, right? So they're going through that developmental stage. They're going through those developmental milestones and how they socialize, how they connect with people, how they reason, how they feel. So this is very much in line with who young people are.
Awesome. Well, I have a few more questions, but we are going to take a break and we're going to come right back. So everyone just hold on, hang on tight. We'll be right back. Hello, everyone, and we are back. Welcome back. And we're here with Dr. Morais Cassell. He's a graduate of Liberty University. I also want to mention that he is the National Alliance on Mental Illness Program Specialist. That's NAMI, Georgia. Dr. Cassell, would you tell us a little bit about NAMI and what they do and what does it mean to be a program specialist? And then we'll go right back into our questions, please.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction and mentioning the great work that we get to do at NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. It is the largest grassroots organization surrounding mental health awareness and helping to come alongside families and people with lived experiences as relates to mental illness. So, as program specialists, I get to lead many of the programs out of NAMI in terms of we get to train first responders, police officers in how to recognize and respond to mental health conditions and suicide ideations. We get to train, go into the schools and train educators, parents, students themselves. We train clinicians, and most recently, we've been so excited that we now have an open door. And last week, actually, out of this taping, we were able to train over 120. I have to remember over 120 lawyers. So there was a particular firm here in the state of Georgia who, for 3 days, we had their lawyers went through an 8-hour training in mental health awareness because that particular firm, they wanted to equip their lawyers in how to better respond to the clients that they serve. So, I'm just excited about the work that I get to do with NAMI. I just want to highlight that work, NAMI.org, NAMI-GA.org. If anyone that you know might be in crisis or might need mental health awareness or resources, we're all throughout the United States. There's an affiliate somewhere close to you. So I love the work that I get to do with NAMI. We also go into the hospitals as well, and we train doctors and nurses. But I think for me, the highlight is that we get to train, being an African American and African Caribbean man, understanding the journey and the challenges of being a Black man in the United States. I literally get to go and sit with the police officers and help them become aware of how to better respond to people in the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, people of color. So I'm very excited about that work.
Thanks for sharing that. And I'm very surprised. I would not have thought of attorneys being, I guess, first responders in that regard. But wow, that's amazing. That first of all, I applaud the attorney office that wanted to have all of their staff and attorneys trained. That's very forward thinking, I think.
Yeah, we were so excited. And I get to, in a couple weeks, I get to do another firm. They are a CPA firm that, again, they want to take, what has happened? We're in a culture right now where what was once a taboo topic has become a topic of discussion. And people are recognizing that they've got to find effective ways of coming alongside the people that they serve. So I will be with a CPA firm. I think we're going to train about maybe 80 something is the number that I received in the next couple of weeks. So
So we were talking about a dissertation, a doctoral study that Dr. Morais Cassell completed. The study was about spiritual-based interventions to reduce anxiety. It's also helping to increase coping skills
Right.
among urban adolescents. And so we talked about the participants. We talked about how they responded to the study. And so there's something else I wanted to also present and ask you a little bit about. And it has to do with the findings of your study. So we could see from the findings of your study that there were decreases in
Mhm.
anxiety among participants, and that's good. But what surprised you the most about the results of your study?
Yeah, I'll tell you this, and I say this loosely, that I was not surprised,
Okay.
and I say that loosely, because what the research did, it supported the work that you and I have done in working with adolescents
Okay.
from a relational standpoint, right?
Okay,
So
tell us a little bit about the work that you and I have done in work, because I was hoping that you talk a little bit about some of the work that you've done. Tell us about the work that you've done.
Yeah, so I the other side of this journey,
Hmm.
prior to now being in the clinical field and doing mental health awareness and therapy, what led me to this work was, I started out working with uh, youth and children in a local church setting, right, and working with young people and children in church. And in working with them, I just felt like I was not equipped to handle all of their prevailing needs and all of what
Wow.
they were facing, the challenges of being urban adolescents, of being from single parent homes. I experienced, several deaths by suicide. I would have to visit young people in the psychiatric facilities. I would deal with cases of abuse, and the list goes on and on. That when you work with just young people in general, you become a part of their lives, you become a part of their world. So of course, serving young people in churches, and then for some time, I was leading about 60 churches in our organization, overseeing the youth work, youth ministries work, and I would get all the calls, right?
Wow.
And being a youth leader that was hands-on and a part of their lives and that was relational, I would be in their homes. I lived in New York. I would drive to Boston. I would drive to Buffalo. I'd be in New York City. I'd be with their families in the courts. I would be at their schools. I'll be in the psychiatric, facilities. And again, I just was not equipped, outside of preaching to them and praying with them, which of course we know works: prayer, preaching, worship, being in the faith community, being church works. We know that. But I just felt like I needed to do a little bit more. So I wanted to be better equipped to handle those needs. So that's when I went back. After being an educator for a few years, I went back and got a second master's in counseling and
Okay.
went on to doing my PhD work. Uh, so to answer that question, this research supported what I had been seeing
Mm.
in the faith community, which is when you come alongside young people, when you are in relationship with them, when you connect with them, then their coping skills will increase, and those challenging and prevailing needs would decrease. So certainly the intervention of the prayer wheel work, but what I've argued that I believe that may have been even more effective was the therapeutic alliance that we developed between researcher and client and participant. Because again, for those 6 weeks, I became a part of their lives, right?
Wow.
I would show up at their schools. I showed up at their basketball games, because again,
Wow.
when you do work with urban adolescents, right,
Gotta be there.
it's not I want to say, it's not, you got to roll your sleeves up. So they weren't going to come into the office where I worked. I had to show up to their school.
Yeah.
I had to meet with their counselor and let them know what I was doing with this research, and they would let me meet them, whether it was sixth period or fourth period, and that's how I got my research. It also meant that I had to go to their basketball games
Mm.
because of that triangulation approach that included what? It included the prayer, it included school, and it now included athletics, because we know in working with urban adolescents that athletics and sports is how they cope, is how they manage, it's how they deal with the pain, it's how they escape. So yeah, yeah. So to answer the question, long and short, it worked, but it supported all of the work that you've done in mentoring so many. And I know you don't want to highlight yourself, but it supports the work that you've done in being there for the urban adolescents that you've served.
Uh, so many people I think may benefit from the study. Anything that you're doing with youth, whether it's a youth director in a church environment or a teacher in a school. I just feel like, first of all, I commend you for actually deciding I need to get something more than what I have to deal with. I realize I'm there, I'm effective, but I can do something else. And so I think the transition that you've made, hopefully it inspires other people to become more equipped. My next question for you is, it relates to the cases where adolescents face trauma through what I call door points of violence. Several authors talk about mindfulness and mindfulness therapy or meditation. And I noticed that mindfulness and meditation were not implemented in any part of your study per se. So I would love to hear your view on meditation as a modality in use today.
Good. So again, thank you for that critical mind and really diving into the research. So you're right. When you look at interventions for people dealing with trauma, you'll see in the research, you'll see in the clinical field, mindfulness is a modality. It's an intervention that's commonly used. And so I do affirm mindfulness. Mindfulness, of course, it helps. The research does show it. The work that I do in therapy shows that it helps young people, children, adolescents, even adults. It helps them to be present in the moment. It helps to calm them, right? So that's what mindfulness is. It's being present in the moment. It's helping people to be calm. But mindfulness, and let me speak to that, is more than just meditation. So often when people hear of mindfulness, they're thinking, well, let's get our hands off, because now you're bringing in that meditation piece, right? Well, mindfulness is more than meditation. It's more than breathing. Mindfulness is simply giving people tools so that they have what's called non-reactive judgment. And what that means is it helps people to not react to the danger that they're facing and to the danger that they feel. So when we're saying, let's be present in the moment, when we're saying, show me 5 things that you could see in the room, or 4 things that you can touch, or 3 things that you could hear, or 2 things that you could smell, or 1 thing that you could taste. Or when we say things like that, what we're doing is it's helping to calm the body. It's helping to disrupt those negative thought processes and kind of disrupt the negative environment, but it's non-reactive judgment, right? So it's, and particularly when you work with young people and you do mindfulness, they'll say to you, I'm still upset. In addition to mindfulness, it's important to take a trauma-informed care approach, right? So it's not enough just to do mindfulness, but trauma affects the entire body.
Yes.
Right. So trauma, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who is a leading authority in trauma therapy, the body keeps the score. He talks about that, where he says, trauma, which is so true, impacts the brain, the mind, the body, and the emotions. So while mindfulness is a common modality and intervention, we're finding that it's important that we take a trauma-informed care approach, where it's not just talking about the cognitive experiences, but what is happening in your body, right? What's going on in your body, right? Because trauma gets trapped in the body. So I'd like to suggest that in addition to mindfulness, that we also integrate a trauma-informed care approach, where we're helping people to feel and to discuss what happened in your body when you were pulled over by the police officer.
Mm.
You can't just you can't just talk it
Ooh.
through, but you've got to work through that. Well, what was
Mhm.
happening was I balled up my fists, right? I
Mm.
felt the anger raging in my body, right? I started to sweat, right? My heart started to pound, right?
Mhm.
So, but if I only help the young person to be mindful and only kind of go at it from a cognitive approach, I would have done them a disservice. So
Wow.
I hope that answered your question.
I think so. And there's something that I want to piggyback on before I ask my final question. We didn't really talk about the pandemic. And I know I know that you did the study in 2018,
Mhm.
but we went through a pandemic and then we are kind of in this after pandemic. And I'm hearing the term um now we're in a mental health
Right,
pandemic. And
right.
so I'm trying to get a sense or temperature
Mhm.
of what I guess what's happening. Okay, we're seeing the attorney offices showing up, the CPAs are showing up. Of course, the first responders, the police officers are already being dealt with and talked to about this. But as it relates to your study and it's like what's actually going on with this pandemic. Would you speak a little bit to that? I know we probably didn't necessarily um
Sure.
but just tell me a little bit about what do you think and not and I don't know if that dates this discussion, but I think it's definitely a pencil nor a pin where we need to say, okay, let's stop and look at all this and let's
Right.
just see where we are. So would you speak to that a little and just
Yeah, thank you for circling back with that because that's so
Mhm.
important because, as I've been doing this work, um, therapy and the clinical work and the mental health awareness, I've been saying to people, it's so important that you check in with youth and children, right?
Mm,
Because whenever there's a crisis can trigger trauma. And
mm,
we're seeing that happening with young people and children, right? Keep in mind, and I say this to parents, I say this to educators, that children and young people, they are little versions of ourselves,
yes.
right? So how we responded to the pandemic is how they are responding to it, but just in their own development. So it's important that we check in with them, that we listen to their stories.
Mhm.
I say this so often that children and young people are the expert in their stories. And if we take
Yeah.
time to listen to them, we will see how significant this pandemic has been. We've seen an increase in depression. We've seen an
Wow.
increase in anxiety. We've
Mm.
seen, and this is with youth and children, we've seen an increase in suicidal ideations and attempts, and unfortunately, completions. But here's the story, because the approach that I take to therapy is not a sad, shock, traumatic approach.
Mm.
Um, Here's the story that we've also found, and this study can speak to that, even though it was 2018,
Mhm.
that young people and children are resilient.
Ah.
That's what we're seeing rising to the top, how resilient they are. I was quite taken aback during the pandemic when um, report out of Denver, and I'm not knocking Denver, but a Denver newspaper came out and they said, this was the headline. They said young people are running out of resiliency, and I wanted to refute that, and I still refute that because the truth is we saw how resilient that this generation was, right?
Mm.
Having to deal with a global pandemic, the harsh realities of racial inequities, all this was happening, an economic downturn, right?
Mm.
The loss of people, property, possession, grief, managing remote education versus
Right.
person, uh, not being a part of the faith community. They couldn't go to church, right?
Right.
We have seen how resilient our children are. So, if anything that we could take out of this pandemic is the resiliency of this generation. They were built for this,
Mm.
made for this. They are handling it better than you and I would have handled this had this happened many years ago
Yeah.
to us.
Yeah. So this is an excellent segue into my final question. What's next? So what do you foresee as the next thing that needs to happen? Let's say with your study and or with people that that read this study, like what's utopia, like what's next, what do you do next after you've accomplished so much so far?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and you know this from research work and dissertation. There's always something at the end of the research where they ask you about the future, right?
yeah,
For me, I would love to see this research. In fact, this research is dated not just by date. 2018 just seems like so long ago. It's not just
yeah,
dated
but it's
by date, but it's also dated by language. And what I mean by
mm,
that is that the language was urban adolescents. Well, we've now moved to calling this community BIPOC youth, right?
yes, please
And
tell us that
indigenous,
acronym
yeah,
again just one more time.
yeah. So BIPOC is the acronym for Black Indigenous People of Color.
Okay.
Right. So, in doing this research, I would now use that language
Mm,
as opposing to urban adolescents. I would speak to the BIPOC community
okay.
and challenges that's being faced with the BIPOC community. I would use, again, the prayer wheel, a spiritually based intervention. And for me, I would love to integrate it with what's called religious cognitive behavior therapy. We're
Mm,
seeing that emerge in the field right now, where in the field we are recognizing that people of faith, people of religious belief, they want their faith integrated into therapy. So,
mm,
you know, the gold standard for therapy work is cognitive behavior therapy.
right.
Well, we are finding there's a new field called religious cognitive behavior therapy that
Mm,
was developed by an amazing doctor out of Duke University, Dr.
mm-hmm.
Harold Koenig. He has developed out of Duke University the Center for Spirituality, where he takes the five major religions and he now integrates that with cognitive behavior therapy, where the five major religions, Christian, Islam, Buddhism, and the list goes on and on,
Yes. Mhm.
Hinduism, all of those, and he's taking the faith experiences and marrying that with cognitive behavior therapy, and the research is showing that that's helping people to cope, manage, and navigate. So that's what I would like to do if I would do this research at this point, is using the prayer wheel, but looking more from a BIPOC perspective, uh,
Mhm.
and then integrating that with religious cognitive behavior therapy. The other thing I wanted to highlight before we close, and I didn't mention about, it's just coming back to my mind, which you will like as it relates to trauma work. Uh,
Mhm.
we're seeing in the field that they are using theater, and this hits right up your alley. They are using theater to treat trauma.
Yeah.
So they're in Boston. I think it's Urban Improv. They
Okay.
also have another project in New York City, where and in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. These
Mm.
are three of the main theater programs that's doing this, where they use theater to help young people who've been traumatized
Mm.
voice their pain. They use Shakespeare. In fact, in Pittsfield, uh, as opposing to having the kids be incarcerated, they sentence them to this project,
Theater.
yes, of theater, and they're seeing great work
Mhm.
happening with that. So, as you can tell, I'm so passionate about this work. I'm passionate about young people. It's been my passion. And now I tell people I get to offer hope through both mental health and through ministry.
That's awesome. And I'm thinking that they're using bold technique. I'm doing something about that. So I'm not gonna spill it now, but I am so pleased with the direction of your study. I'm so pleased with what you've found and how I'm hoping that maybe that professor might give you a call and say, hey, can I add your study to one of the religions, as I want to go that path. It would be so awesome to just,
All
I
right.
mean, to be cited and just to, be. I mean, you already are regarded as, a force to be reckoned with in this field. We take for granted the mountains of influence that we have sometimes, and I think you've definitely demonstrated the influence that you've had, not only in the quote unquote mountain of religion where you're like a leader, but now, shifting over to policy, because that's where some of this is going to go,
Yes,
I would think,
yes.
right?
Yep, sitting at the table. And that's what I tell people. I get to sit at the table and not just sit at the table, but I help to cause change to happen at the table.
Mhm.
And who better? Who better than
Kingdom kids.
there you go. Let's just call it that, right? Who better than believers
Yeah.
to bring light into these very dark places, right? So I get to go into these settings where ministry just would not take me. I could
Right.
go in as a
Right.
preacher, and it's just a reality. But I
Mhm.
get to go in, and I'm the expert in the room, right? That's the work that I do. But when I go in, I'm also, I don't check my faith. My faith
At the
doesn't
door.
stand outside.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
there with me, and that light is there, and I get to speak hope. So, absolutely.
Yay! So this is awesome. So again, I'm so happy to have you with us, and I will definitely keep up with more of the developments that you're doing. It's been an honor and privilege to talk to you about your study. And hopefully, I don't know, maybe there's a book or there's something that's coming out that you're working on, or and we'll have you come back and talk about that. I also want to say on behalf of the network that we so appreciate the interviews that you've done. We appreciate NAMI for many of the interviews they've allowed us to, and the workshops that they've allowed us to film and air on our network. And I just want to just say, keep going, because everybody loves it that watches it. So thank you again.
Well, thank you, my friend, for having me. Thank you for the amazing work that you're doing through this medium. So thank you. And listen, blessings to all of you watching. For those of you who receive blessings, and well wishes to those of you who receive well wishes. But we speak the language of faith and blessings.
All right. Thanks again. Bye.